This is Beck Zajac. You're listening to 3CR, and I'm joined by Tess Lawrence, contributing editor-at-large for news website Independent Australia. Welcome, Tess.
Oh, Beck, Thank you very much. I'm actually very excited. Thank you.
Excellent. So am I. So, Tess, you'll be part of a panel discussion organised by Socialist Alternative entitled Corporate Media and Capitalism.
Look, I will be, Beck, and I'm in very hallowed company, I might add, because I know my fellow forum person is none other than Martin Hurst, who I understand is Associate Professor at Deakin University. I used to teach there some years ago.
Great, yeah, hopefully we'll get a chance to catch up with Martin as well. And the panel's being organised as a response to the recent controversy surrounding Gina Rinehart's push for influence within Fairfax Media. The Reinhardt manoeuvring has raised questions about the editorial independence of the mainstream press and the domination of the media landscape by a small number of corporations. Tess, as someone who's worked in the press for a long time, how would you describe the state of the Australian media landscape at the moment?
Well, I think suffering from sort of journalistic syphilis, really, Beck. We've been in this state for some time, I might add. And I should say that we ought not to blame Gina Rinehart for the current state of affairs, indeed. Mm-hmm. After all, we're quite used to media oligarchies in Australia, and not only are we quite used to them, we've done very little to rebel against them.
And do you feel the media in Australia has become more consolidated over the last decade?
Well, I think we've become more conservative as the years gone on. And what's ironical, Beck, is that the more access that we have to fantastic technology, I mean, this technology is so blooming exciting, we've withdrawn into ourselves, sort of. To hear someone like John Hartigan, the former news chief of News Limited, make a sort of hallowed speech about journalism and fail to mention, fail to mention the consequences or the ramifications of citizen journalism and something like the Iran Revolution that had only taken place a few weeks before he made the speech. I mean, I thought that was totally untenable. Mm-hmm. And, it makes one suspicious of everything else that a person has to say, because why exclude something? I mean, News Limited they weren't contemptuous enough of citizen journalism to put photos that young people had taken on the front pages of their newspapers around the world. Mm-hmm. Were we? I mean, we were all relied on that, on photos and people's, ghastly things that people had captured on mobile phones.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit more about what role you think citizen journalism can play?
Well, I think it's absolutely critical. I mean, I am not at all arrogant that somebody has to come up through mainstream media or even necessarily go to university. I certainly didn't go to university, although I've taught at university, and I certainly sneaked into a few lectures from time to time. But I'm not advocating that other people do that, but I did. I think we're all journalists. We're all messengers. I mean, as soon as you speak to another people, me speaking to you, you speak to somebody else, we are messengers. We're witnesses. We're witnesses to our daily lives. Our daily lives is the world writ large. That's how I feel. I don't feel, there's no such thing to me as a slow news day. What there is, a slow journalist day,
for sure.
We've got mainstream media complaining that the reason why they've got so much pap in their newspapers is because of the demands of the 24-hour news cycle. Hello, news has always been on a 24-hour news cycle. Just because journalists have shifts and on the weekend there are lesser staff doesn't mean to say that the world stops turning. It doesn't.
Mm-hmm. And you're an editor of an independent news website, Independent Australia. Could you talk to us a little bit about what it means for a news outlet to be truly independent and why it's important to have sites like IA?
Well, I certainly know as contributing editor that, and David Donovan is the managing editor, and the founder, I should say, of the website. And it's only 2 and a bit years old, We've got through the terrible twos, and they've never been terrible, actually, and terrifically exciting, really. And it is exciting working for the website. I don't want to give you false stats, but I know that we're rocketing up there, you know. And one of the reasons is because David is a courageous editor, and he's also a journalist and writer. So it's awful sometimes when you've got an editor who's never really cared about being a journalist because somehow they don't sort of understand. I mean, I still get excited about a story every single time. I honestly say that I don't feel any less excited these years afterwards than I did on the first day I started. And when that feeling goes, I'll stop. But one of the great things of working for Independent Australia is the fact that there's not there's not sensorial sort of domination, and we don't have the hard fist of commercialism and advertising, beating us about, it sometimes happens. Certainly there are stories there that still ought to appear in mainstream media, and they're certainly of international and national consequence and state and territories consequence, but they are just not touched by mainstream media, and you have to ask why.
And I assume we're going to be hearing a little bit more about this debate. Could you tell us a little bit about what you'll be talking about at the event?
I'm leaving things, as I always do, to the last minute, Beck, because I always need a deadline to frighten the hell out of me. See? But I know that I will be. I'll be interested in talking about the Julian Assange affair. Because, now he's a cause célèbre, but I can tell you that several years ago when I tried to get editors and journalists interested in him, they didn't want a bar of him, now they all want to be his best friend. The issues that concern me about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange were issues that concerned me on day one of the story. So, but one thing that I'm going to be really interested in is our questions from the audience, because I think that after Martin and I have a brief chat, that we're going to take questions from the floor, and quite frankly, like the comments in Independent Australia, which are an important part of freedom of expression, and I'm terribly interested in the comments that people leave on media outlets. I'm really, really keen to hear what questions people put to us. And as far as I'm concerned, it's no holds barred. I just don't do interviews, and never have, with people who say you can speak to so-and-so, but don't ask them about X, Y, Z. And if they say that to me, I'll say, well, look, I'll pass on this.
Thanks very much, Tess. Well, hopefully listeners will get themselves along to that event. I
look forward to it very much, and I'm thrilled to bits that the SA have invited me, and I'm equally thrilled to bits too that you've called me back, and I'm a great fan of 3CRs, and I'm well aware that you publish things that mainstream media certainly wouldn't touch with a barge pole.
Well, thank you, Tess. We're very excited to have you for the interview.
Thank you so much, Beck.
Thanks. You're listening to 3CR, and we were just joined by Tess Lawrence, contributing editor-at-large for news website Independent Australia. Tess will be part of a panel discussion organised by Socialist Alternative entitled Corporate Media and Capitalism. The event will be at the Trades Hall.